It was just another ordinary Monday morning at Phoenix First Bank. Busy, predictable, nothing out of the ordinary. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly as keyboards clicked in rhythm. Customers stood in line, scrolling through their phones, waiting to deposit checks, make transfers, or complain about fees. Behind the polished counters, the young and sharply dressed bank employees sipped on overpriced lattes, cracking jokes about the weekend and talking about crypto like they knew what they were doing. To them, it was just another 9 to 5 in a climate-controlled office. That's when it happened. The glass door creaked open, and for a second, no one really looked up, but then he stepped in. A man, clearly homeless, stood at the threshold of the bank. His clothes were stained and torn at the sleeves. His shoes, if you could even call them that, were duct-taped together, and his shaggy gray beard masked most of his face. His eyes, though, were striking. Calm, deep, watchful. He didn't stumble. He didn't reek of alcohol. He just walked, slowly, intentionally, toward the center of the lobby, clutching a worn-out leather folder tightly in his hand. You could tell this man hadn't had a good meal or a warm bed in weeks, maybe months. Instantly, the energy in the room shifted. Conversations hushed. Eyes narrowed. Sophie, the assistant manager, was the first to react. Early 30s, blazer too tight, always eager to impress. She stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable, her professional smile slipping fast. "Sir," she said, arms crossed, "I think you might be looking for the shelter down the street." The man didn't respond. He simply looked around, scanning the room. Then, with a soft voice and a slight nod, he asked, "Is Mr. Jonathan Reed here today?" That one sentence seemed to pause time. Sophie blinked. "Excuse me? You're here to see Mr. Reed?" "Our branch director." A couple of customers snickered. One of the tellers rolled his eyes. The security guard by the door shifted his weight and subtly adjusted his walkie-talkie. Still, the man didn't flinch. He stood with surprising grace, like someone who'd once worn a suit and tie, someone who used to command attention. There was a quiet dignity about him that didn't match the grime on his hands. "Please," he said again softly, "tell Jonathan that Michael Harper is here." The name floated in the air like a whisper no one could place. Sophie, clearly losing her patience, smirked. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Harper?" Michael said nothing, just smiled gently, as if the entire situation amused him. At that point, Sophie motioned to the security guard. "I think it's time you leave," she said curtly. "Our customers are getting uncomfortable." But just before the guard could make a move, something unexpected happened. Claire, an older teller who had been with the bank for over 25 years, suddenly stood up from her station. She looked pale, stunned. Her voice trembled. "Wait, did you say Michael Harper?" Michael turned his head toward her, nodding slightly. Claire stepped out from behind the counter, her hands shaking. "Oh my God! Michael Harper, it's you." Sophie looked confused. "Claire, what's going on?" But Claire didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out her phone and sent a quick message to the director. Within seconds, literally seconds, the office door at the back of the bank flung open, and Jonathan Reed, the polished, confident branch director in a tailored navy blue suit, appeared. He looked ready to yell. He had seen the footage from the lobby camera and assumed there was some kind of disturbance. But when his eyes landed on the man in the center of the lobby, he froze. His mouth opened slightly. His phone dropped to the floor. "Michael?" he whispered. Michael smiled. "Hello, Jonathan." The silence that followed was deafening. Every employee, every customer, every breath seemed to pause. Jonathan Reed, the man who rarely showed emotion, suddenly blinked back tears. Then, in front of the entire bank, he walked straight up to Michael and hugged him. Not a polite pat on the back kind of hug. A real one. A tight, emotional, long overdue kind of embrace. Gasps filled the lobby. Sophie's face went red. No one understood what they were witnessing. But Claire did. She had a tear rolling down her cheek. This wasn't just some random homeless man. This wasn't a stunt. This was Michael Harper. The lobby of Phoenix First Bank had gone quiet, like the moment right before a thunderstorm hits. The man, wrapped in layers of worn-out jackets and faded denim, stood patiently at the front counter. His hair was silver and uncombed, his face weathered by years of sun, wind, and hardship. In his hand was a thin leather folder that had seen better days. He looked completely out of place, like a forgotten soul wandering into a place built for polished shoes and pressed collars. Sophie, the assistant manager, stood on the other side of the counter, her expression stuck somewhere between confusion and irritation. At first, she had tried to be polite, assuming the man had wandered in by mistake. But then he asked, very calmly, very directly, "Is Mr. Jonathan Reed here today?" Sophie blinked at him, clearly caught off guard. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Jonathan Reed," he repeated. "I need to speak with him. It's important." That's when her tone changed, from polite to patronizing in less than 5 seconds. She let out a short, nervous laugh, like she wasn't sure if this was a prank or something she should be worried about. "Sir," she said slowly, as if explaining to a child, "Mr. Reed is our branch director. He doesn't have time for walk-ins, especially without an appointment." The man simply nodded, still calm. "Just let him know that Michael Harper is here. He'll want to see me." At that name, Michael Harper, Sophie froze for a moment. The name rang a faint bell, but she couldn't place it. It sounded familiar, but distant, like a song you heard once a long time ago. Still, she shrugged it off. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harper," she said, her tone turning cold, "but I have to ask, do you even have a bank account here?" A couple of tellers nearby chuckled under their breath. One of them, a young guy named Kyle, whispered to his co-worker, "Maybe he's here to cash in soda cans." They laughed. The man, Michael, heard them, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, quiet, dignified, not even flinching. Sophie leaned over the counter slightly, her voice dropping into a more commanding tone. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have other customers to assist." "I understand," Michael said. "Just please tell Jonathan I'm here." At this point, she turned to the security guard, a big guy named Rick, who had been watching the scene unfold with a bored expression. "Rick, can you please escort this gentleman out? This is a place of business, not a day center." Rick nodded and took a step forward. But then, something changed. From the back of the lobby, an older woman, Claire, the longest-serving teller in the branch, stood up slowly from her station. Her eyes were locked on Michael. Her face had gone pale. She whispered, almost too softly for anyone to hear, "Michael? Harper?" Sophie glanced over, confused. "You know him?" Claire didn't respond. Her hand was shaking as she pulled out her phone. She typed something quickly and hit send. Michael smiled softly when he saw her. "Hello, Claire. Long time." She looked like she might cry. Sophie, annoyed and clearly feeling out of the loop, muttered, "What is going on?" Just then, the door to the director's office swung open. All eyes turned. Jonathan Reed, tall, confident, always polished, stepped out of his office in mid-conversation on his headset. He glanced up at the lobby, expecting the usual. Then he saw Michael, and everything stopped. His headset slipped from his ear. His phone clattered to the floor. "Michael?" he said, barely above a whisper. Michael nodded. "Hello, Jonathan." The look on Jonathan's face was pure disbelief. For a moment, he just stood there, mouth slightly open, not moving. Then, before anyone could speak, he walked straight across the room, past stunned employees and confused customers, and embraced Michael. It wasn't a business handshake. It wasn't a polite greeting. It was the kind of hug you give to someone you haven't seen in a lifetime, someone who changed your life. The staff stood frozen, not knowing whether to apologize or run. Sophie looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Wait, that's the Michael Harper?" Jonathan finally pulled back, still gripping Michael's shoulders, eyes glassy. "You have no idea," he said to no one in particular. This man is the reason I'm even standing here today." The entire bank was silent. The once laughed-at homeless guy had just been hugged by the man at the top of the food chain. Suddenly, everyone's behavior over the past 5 minutes felt small, petty, ugly. Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. Michael adjusted the folder in his hand and looked around at the stunned faces. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," he said softly. "I just want to say thank you." And just like that, everything changed. Jonathan Reed stood frozen in the middle of the bank lobby, still gripping the shoulders of the man who had just walked in from the cold. Michael Harper. The name alone was like a time machine. It pulled him backward, 15 years, maybe more, into a memory he hadn't visited in a long time. And just like that, it all came rushing back. 15 years ago. Back then, Jonathan wasn't director. He wasn't wearing designer suits or giving motivational speeches at corporate luncheons. He was just a scared 23-year-old fresh out of college, working as a junior associate in a tiny, cramped branch office of the same bank. It was his first real job, and he was failing. He messed up small tasks, got nervous on phone calls, spilled coffee on paperwork. The kind of rookie mistakes that get you whispered about in the break room. His supervisor, a real piece of work, made it worse. Every little error, every small delay, turned into a public scolding. Jonathan tried harder, stayed late, skipped lunch, but nothing was enough. He felt like a ghost, seen but not valued. He started wondering if he'd ever be good enough. And that's when Michael Harper stepped in. At the time, Michael was one of the senior loan officers. Not loud, not flashy, but respected. Everyone in the office knew. If you needed something done right, ask Michael. He never raised his voice, never boasted, but he had a presence that made people listen. Jonathan still remembered the first time they really spoke. He was standing at the copier, red-faced after misprinting an entire stack of forms, ready to hide in the bathroom for the rest of the day. Michael walked over, handed him a fresh packet, and said, "Don't worry, kid. Everyone's a disaster in their first year. The trick is not to let it break you." Jonathan looked up, surprised. No one had ever said anything like that to him. From that day on, Michael made a point to check in with him. Little things. A tip on how to word emails better. Reminders to breathe before a meeting. Even sharing his own embarrassing stories from his early days. But it wasn't just mentoring. Michael believed in him. When Jonathan's supervisor tried to have him fired over a minor mistake, Michael stepped in and vouched for him in front of upper management. That was risky. Career suicide risky. But Michael didn't blink. "He's green," Michael had said in the meeting. "But he's got heart. Give him time." And they did, because Michael said so. Over the next few years, Jonathan grew, faster than anyone expected. He gained confidence, got promoted, and eventually transferred to a larger branch. Every step he took forward, he carried Michael's words with him. The trick is not to let it break you. Then one day, Michael was gone. Word spread quietly that he had resigned. Some said he had family issues. Others whispered about money problems. A few weeks later, someone mentioned he'd been seen at a bus stop with all his belongings in a single duffel bag. Most people moved on, but Jonathan never forgot. Present day, standing there in the middle of the bank he now ran. Looking into the eyes of the man who had once saved his career, Jonathan felt a lump rise in his throat. The irony wasn't lost on him. The kid who almost got fired was now running the show, and the man who saved him was being escorted out by security. "I need a few minutes," Jonathan said to his staff, waving them off gently. "Clear the lobby." He led Michael into his office, closed the door. Michael looked around, smiling at the framed degrees, the plaques, the corporate awards. "You made it," he said simply. Jonathan sat down slowly. "Because of you." Michael waved it off like it wasn't a big deal, but it was. And Jonathan wasn't going to let him brush it aside. "You don't understand, Michael. I was falling apart. I was about to quit. I thought I didn't matter." He paused and added, "But you saw something in me before I ever saw in myself." Michael looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of the leather folder he still carried. There was a quiet in the room that only old friends understand. Finally, Jonathan asked, "What happened to you, Michael? Where did you go?" Michael took a deep breath, and then, softly, "I lost my wife. Cancer. Then I lost my job. Then my house. One thing after another. You think you can survive anything until life keeps hitting. Jonathan's chest tightened. And you never asked for help? Michael smiled. You were building your life. I didn't want to be the shadow hanging over it. Silence again, until Jonathan stood up. No, he said firmly. You were never a shadow. You were my light when everything else was falling apart. He walked around the desk, placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. Now, let me be that for you. Michael's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He just nodded, as if finally letting go of years of carrying the weight alone. Later that day, Jonathan gathered the staff. This man, he began, gesturing toward Michael, was once the reason I'm standing here. He believed in me when no one else did, and I'll never forget that. He paused. So from this day forward, Michael Harper will no longer stand outside our doors. He belongs inside them. The lobby erupted in applause. Even Sophie looked ashamed but relieved as she joined in. Sometimes a hero is the one you forgot about, the one who disappeared quietly, the one who never asked for credit. But when life comes full circle, the truth always rises. The next morning, the office felt different. Jonathan Reed sat in his corner office, the city skyline stretching out behind him. But his thoughts weren't on reports or profits. They were on a man sleeping in a guest room of his downtown apartment, a man named Michael Harper, a man who, 15 years ago, gave Jonathan a second chance without ever asking for anything in return. Now it was his turn, a promise to keep. Jonathan didn't sleep much that night. Michael hadn't wanted to stay at his place, but Jonathan insisted. It wasn't just charity, it was personal. Michael had saved his life in every way that mattered. Now he was sleeping on a soft bed, warm for the first time in who knows how long. Jonathan stood over the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, thinking, how do you repay someone who never asked to be repaid? He didn't want to just hand Michael money. That wasn't who Michael was. This man had pride, integrity, dignity. No, what Michael needed wasn't pity. What he needed was purpose again. So Jonathan picked up the phone and made a call. The boardroom battle. By noon, Jonathan was in a meeting with the executive board of the bank. He knew what he was about to say would raise eyebrows, maybe even get pushback, but he didn't care. Some things are bigger than corporate policy. He stood in front of the room and said clearly, I want to bring someone back into the company, someone who once worked here and deserves a second chance. They listened, but when he mentioned the name Michael Harper, there was a wave of discomfort. Jonathan, one of the senior VPs, said, with all due respect, he's homeless now. He's been out of the industry for over a decade. He's not exactly what we consider a good fit. Jonathan smiled politely. Neither was I once. Silence. Then he added, Michael Harper was the reason I didn't quit 15 years ago. He trained me, protected me, and stood up for me when I was just a clueless kid trying to find my place. You're not just hiring a former banker. You're honoring the kind of loyalty this company claims to stand for. They still hesitated. So Jonathan delivered the final blow. If he doesn't work out, you can dock my bonus. But if we can give a second chance to a man who once gave this company everything, then maybe we're not just a business, we're a family. And with that, the room went quiet. Then a few nods, a few murmurs. Approved. Rebuilding the man. When Jonathan told Michael the news, he didn't believe it at first. They're hiring me? Michael asked, almost in disbelief. After all these years? Not just hiring, Jonathan replied. They're making you a mentor. You'll help train the young associates, just like you trained me. Michael's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. I don't even have a suit, he whispered. Jonathan smiled. Then we've got some shopping to do. They went together. New clothes, a haircut, a fresh shave. It wasn't about looking good. It was about reminding Michael who he really was. Piece by piece, the man returned. He walked taller. He spoke clearer. The spark came back. And when Michael stepped into bank the following Monday, wearing a navy blue blazer and polished shoes, every head in the room turned. Sophie, the receptionist who once judged him, was the first to approach. I'm so sorry for how I treated you, she said quietly. Michael looked at her and smiled kindly. We all have off days. No anger, no resentment, just grace. Because that's who he was. The ripple effect. Michael didn't just do the job. He changed the atmosphere. He brought calm to the chaos, patience to the pressure. The younger staff began seeking him out during breaks, asking for advice. People started staying later, not because they had to, but because they wanted to learn from him. And Jonathan watched it all unfold with quiet pride. He hadn't just given a man a job. He had given the whole office a compass, a role model, a story worth remembering. One day, during a corporate event, Jonathan took the stage and told Michael's story. He didn't spare the details. He spoke of the fall, but more importantly, the rise. And then he said, second chances aren't handouts. They're investments. And Michael Harper is proof that when you invest in the right person, the return is priceless. The room erupted in applause. Michael, sitting in the front row, looked down at his hands. Hands that had once carried the weight of grief, loss, and shame. Now they carried legacy. Full circle. Weeks later, Jonathan and Michael sat together at a small coffee shop near the river. No suits, no titles, just two men who had been through the storm and found each other again. You didn't have to do all this, Michael said. Jonathan took a sip of his coffee, then looked at him with quiet sincerity. Yes, I did. He paused. Because years ago, when nobody believed in me, you did. And now, I get to pass that forward. Not just to you, but to every scared kid who walks through those bank doors thinking he's not enough. Michael smiled, eyes misty. You became the man I always knew you could be. And just like that, it wasn't about jobs anymore. It wasn't about banks or titles. It was about humanity, about remembering that sometimes all someone needs is a chance to be seen again. It started with the way he listened. Michael Harper never raised his voice. He didn't bark orders or quote business manuals. But something about the way he listened, like your words actually mattered, began to shift the entire energy inside the bank. At first, the younger associates weren't sure what to make of him. To them, he was a new mentor guy, the one brought in by the boss himself, Jonathan Reed. They had heard whispers that he was homeless, that he used to work here a long time ago, that the boss owed him something. But no one expected the change he would bring, not even Jonathan. The ripple begins. It was Sophie who noticed it first. Sophie, the receptionist who had once sneered when Michael entered the bank looking ragged and lost. She hadn't even made eye contact that day. But now, she found herself drawn to the man's quiet presence. He never walked past without greeting her, by name. Morning, Sophie. That's a lovely color on you. Simple, polite, consistent. And then there was Jordan, the cocky intern who thought he knew everything about finance because he watched YouTube videos on investment hacks. The kind who rolled his eyes at anything old school. One day, he ran into Michael in the break room. Back in my day, we didn't have Google, Michael said, stirring his coffee. We had to read balance sheets until our eyes crossed. Jordan chuckled. Guess things were harder, huh? Michael nodded. Harder, but more human. We had to actually talk to people, understand what kept them up at night. Money isn't just numbers. It's trust. It's fear. It's hope. That stuck with Jordan. He started asking Michael questions after that, not just about finance, but about people, the unspoken shift. One by one, the staff began to notice something felt different. There were fewer complaints at the front desk. Colleagues began helping each other instead of competing for credit. Juniors stayed a little later, not because they had to, but because they wanted to run something by Michael before heading home. He never acted like he knew everything. He just listened. And when he spoke, it wasn't to impress. It was to teach. And boy, did they learn. Sarah, a young analyst, once burst into tears after losing a major client. She was sure she was going to be fired. Michael found her in the stairwell, trying to pull herself together. He didn't say, "You'll be fine." He didn't give a pep talk. He sat beside her and told a story. Once, I lost a $2 million account because I called a client's wife by the wrong name. He said with a chuckle, I thought I was done for. But you know what? The boss didn't fire me. He made me apologize. Then he told me, You're not your worst day. You're what you learn from it. Sarah blinked, her tears slowing. You'll come back stronger, he said gently. She did. A new culture. It wasn't just emotional support. Michael also brought integrity. One afternoon, a junior staffer admitted privately to Michael that he had accidentally approved a risky client account that might cost the bank. The guy was scared. He was going to keep quiet. But Michael didn't lecture him. He asked, if your name were on the line, would you want someone to cover up your mistake or help you fix it before it got worse? The kid reported it. The issue was resolved. No one got fired. In fact, the entire compliance team created a new safety protocol because of that one mistake. Michael didn't just fix things. He inspired people to want to do better. Recognition without applause. Jonathan watched it all from afar, quietly proud. He didn't need to announce Michael's impact. Everyone saw it. One day, during a team huddle, one of the department heads stood up and said, I just want to say, ever since Mr. Harper joined us, I feel like this place is a heart again. Heads nodded. Another chimed in. He reminded me why I got into banking in the first place. Not just to count money, but to help people. Even the HR manager, who had initially hesitated to greenlight Michael's return, came to Jonathan and admitted bringing him back was the best decision you ever made. He's not just mentoring staff. He's mentoring our culture. The surprise celebration. A few weeks later, the staff organized something special. It wasn't fancy. No suits. No champagne. Just a simple gathering in the break room. Balloons. Cupcakes. A banner that read, Thank you, Mr. Harper, for seeing the best in us. Michael walked in and froze. Dozens of employees stood up and clapped. His eyes widened. What is all this? Sophie stepped forward with a card signed by over 70 employees. It's from all of us for your patience, your kindness, your wisdom, and most of all, for reminding us what it means to be human. Michael took the card. He didn't speak right away. But when he did, his voice cracked slightly. I didn't come back here to change anyone. I just wanted to be useful again. Then he looked around the room, at the young faces, the seasoned ones, the awkward smiles and teary eyes. You all gave me more than I ever gave you. Legacy beyond numbers. A few months later, Michael was offered a permanent position as Director of Staff Development, not because of his resume, but because of his impact. But he turned it down. I'm honored, he told Jonathan, but I think it's time I do something else. Maybe help other companies like this one, places that forgot how to care. Jonathan understood. Michael didn't belong behind a desk anymore. He belonged out there, teaching the world what this little bank had just learned. That dignity can't be measured in titles. That a second chance can transform not just a man, but an entire system. That one quiet voice can echo through hundreds of lives.